latest weather, traffic, and news updates online at 560theanswer.com. Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft on AM 560. The Answer.
AM 560, The Answer. Chris Crock in for Dan Proft. He's back tomorrow on Chicago's Morning Answer. Follow me on social media at Chris Crock Show. That's at Chris Crock Show, ChrisKrock on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and then on the other channels that, Rumble, YouTube, etc., at Crock Talk Radio, KROKTALK Radio, at Crock Talk Radio. 312-642-5600 is our number. Now listen, here's what happened. As I prepare for the show, look at a whole bunch of sites nationally, and then I dig deep into Chicago. And there's so many, so much abundant information flying everywhere in a good way. So I'm watching a story. I see a story on Channel 32, Fox 32, WFLD, and I see that, and I said, oh my gosh, Brown's Chicken Massacre. Now, I don't know where you were when the Brown's Chicken Massacre happened, but if you were of anywhere, producer Quinn remembers when he was 13 when it happened. I was about 20 years old, living in Buffalo Grove. So you can imagine the, I don't say terror or horror, but, the serious concern going, somebody murdered 7 people, took these, the owners, the husband and wife owners, and 5 other employees, ushered them back into the fridge, and shot and killed them, execution style, I believe. And they did not solve this thing for years. And I literally, when I first saw this story yesterday or the day before in the news about this brand new book that was put together and has just been released by Patrick Wohl, author and lawyer originally from Illinois. The book is called Something Big, and that title is very interesting, which we'll get to in a minute. The true story of Brown's Chicken Massacre, a decade-long manhunt and trials that followed. My family and I religiously went to Brown's Chicken. There were so many locations. Apparently, there's only one. Quinn says he thinks there's only one now. That was my next question: are they still around? But we went to the one on Dundee Road, or as the Indian guy at the 7-Eleven, you take the Dundee over on the Dundee, and by the railroad tracks there in Wheeling, man, Wheeling. So we call it Wheeling. Anyway, but we had many Brown's Chickens nights. But it was kind of terrifying or scary to be like, in Palatine, this happened. Northwest Highway. I remember exactly where it was. Not far from where I grew up in Buffalo Grove. My age 12 to 22 or something like that. Anyway, okay, let's talk to Patrick Wohl, the author of this book, Something Big, The True Story of Brown's Chicken Massacre, a decade-long manhunt and the trials that followed. Patrick, welcome to Chicago's Morning Answer.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for coming on, my friend. Okay, what made you, now obviously you've been working on the book, I think, for 2-3 years or so. What made you, out of 29, 30 years after the Brown's Chicken Massacre happened, write about this? Again, by the way, brilliant timing, I think. And it's been a long time.
It has been a long time. I mean, it's been more than 30 years, and there's certainly been other things written about this. There's been other podcasts. There's a podcast episode on this almost every month. And what I found is that it's often done by people who get the small things wrong. They pronounce the names of things wrong. They get facts wrong, and they get the big things wrong too. In that they leave out the stories of the people that are impacted. And I always walked away wanting to learn more about who investigated this crime, the police, the crime scene technicians, how it impacted the community, and most importantly, the stories of the victims, which is really just kind of a footnote in the past. And so I try to dive a lot deeper into that. And like you said, yes, it took many years to do this, and I spoke to more than 40 people who were involved, including some of the families, investigators, the attorneys. So try to give people a different perspective on this case, because I think people know it, but there's a lot of people don't know as well.
Yeah. What do these people that have written books or do podcasts, one of the things you mentioned is they're not Chicagoland natives like we are, like you and I are. And so they just don't know, comparatively speaking. What are some of the things that are typically wrong, whether it be small or big, that a lot of these places get? What are the handful of things or a couple things that you're like, these bleepity bleeps are not getting it? They're missing these major or small things that are very important.
Well, the biggest thing is kind of what I alluded to already, that often the victims are just kind of glanced over in a paragraph or two, or they're just mentioned in kind of a cold way in a podcast. So I try to bring their stories to life a lot more. And the first third of the book is really mostly about them. And so a lot of that is based on, conversations with family, or a lot of the documents that came out from the trials in 2007 and 2009. I was very lucky in that two things. A lot of time had passed, so I think people were more willing to speak about it. Obviously, they still live with it if you're impacted or you're close to it. It's just a horrible tragedy you never get over.
Right.
But two, the trials had happened in 2007 and 2009, so I had all of the transcripts. A lot of people testified about, their personal stories too, and so that was particularly helpful in this. And that's kind of the common theme, though, to your question of what people missed. It's those stories. So, for example, there was a first suspect in this case. His name was Martin Blake. He was a guy in the suburbs, a little quirky. He had worked at the restaurant, and he was kind of thumbed as the first suspect in the early hours after this all broke. And he ended up having nothing to do with it. But I talked to him about what it was like to have his name completely drawn through the ringer and put on all the broadcasts and front page of newspapers. And he actually had to leave the state because it ruined his life. So there's all sorts of different unique perspectives to this. And I try to go about it in kind of a much more human way in the past, and do it in a way that is both, interesting for people in Chicago who know this and people who have no connection, but also as not sensational as possible. I try to do it in the most respectful way a true crime book can be.
Patrick Wohl, author and lawyer, the book Something Big, the true story of the Brown's Chicken Massacre, a decade-long manhunt. All right, a couple things. I want to ask you about, at the time, WFLD wrote about this, Channel 32. At the time, the murders were believed to be a botched robbery. Tell me why you don't believe that's true in any way, shape, or form. Because they did get a grand. They did get a grand. And I looked up the value of a grand today, back in '93, and it's like $2,224 of a hit that would be nowadays.
Yeah.
They sold.
Yeah, there's a couple reasons why this was ultimately a thrill kill. That's the title of the book, Something Big. That's the motive or the excuse that the killers gave when they were arrested. They said they wanted to do something big, and it's kind of a chilly and very untidy ending to this, because nobody knows exactly what that means, and they haven't quite explained it. But there's other signs too. I mean, Juan Luna, who was one of the killers, had actually worked at the restaurant and knew some of the people there. He knew one of the
at that actual Brown's Chicken, not just a Brown's Chicken, because Channel 32 didn't specify that in their report. So this one of the two murderers, Brown's Chicken Massacre, did work at that location previously.
Yes. So he had worked for, there was a previous owner at that franchise in Palatine, and then he overlapped, I think, for, maybe just a couple weeks with the new owners, the Ehlenfelds, who bought the restaurant in Palatine. So he recognized them. He didn't know these people particularly well. They didn't know him well, but it's enough that you would recognize someone. He also knew one of the employees who was a high schooler who had overlapped. And so they didn't go to the restaurant with masks or anything like that. And, you don't go to a place and rob it that's full of people that
right,
without masks if you intend to rob it. They also left money there. There was money in the safe, and so yeah, I think the intent, unfortunately, was just kind of a sick thrill kill.
That's insane, because to this day I didn't necessarily know that. And when I saw you wrote this book about the Brown's Chicken Massacre from 32 years ago, I could not remember, were they convicted, were they caught? I couldn't remember. It's been so long, right? And then once I read this article, it flashed back to me that the girlfriend of it was James Degorski or Juan Luna that used to work at that location before they murdered the seven.
It was Juan Luna. So they both went to Friend High School. They'd grown up in the area,
and that blows me away because I went to Wheeling High School. I mean, so these are competitor schools. Friend and some of the victims went to Palatine. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's really one of the sad parts of this is that when they were caught, I mean, people realized that these were people in their community. One of the things that usually happens in a mass murder like this, or someone who commits horrible acts, or a serial killer, is usually they act again or they do something else.
Right.
And these guys had pretty clean records after this. They didn't really get in trouble with the law. Luna had a family, had a child, pretty normal life. They were, by all accounts, just normal guys in the suburbs. And so I think that really shocked people to know that these were two guys who went to the same schools and the same stores and churches and grew up in the area.
Patrick Wohl, the book is Something Big, the true story of the Brown's Chicken Massacre, a decade-long manhunt and trials that followed. Wanted to also ask you about this. There was genuine fear. It was Ann Lockett, Degorski's girlfriend, who turned him in, like 9 years later? You can correct me on that in a sec. So she lived in fear. Apparently, they had threatened her, or he had threatened her. But he wasn't living with her for the whole 10 years or anything, was he? I mean, where was he compared to where she was at? I mean, how could you let somebody keep you from turning in murderers for that long, especially if you're not living with the guy?
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. Obviously, she waited too long. There's no question of that, and that caused a lot of pain and suffering for people for an unnecessary amount of time. I think what people read in the book is that there was genuine fear there. I mean, they threatened to kill her. They kept tabs on her over the years, calling, checking in with her and family, and so that I think is the basis for that. Obviously, no excuse for not coming forward earlier, but it's a sad part of this, but it's also interesting. One of the sisters of the victims told me, at the end of the day, it kind of worked out the way it was supposed to, because if she had come forward early, she was a very imperfect person to come forward. She had all sorts of drug problems and was in a facility recovering with mental health issues. And at that time, she'd been fired from jobs. And so it would have been her word against that of two guys who really didn't have much of a record. And at that time, the police didn't have DNA to connect them to the scene.
That's it. Go ahead. Sorry, I cut you off. They didn't have DNA. But let me interject, I guess, because what's crazy is, I love how you all this stuff is so fascinating. You point out that that evidence tech, which my dad used to be an evidence tech many decades ago with Chicago police, and another in patrol and stuff. But in this case, they got the DNA. There was no DNA technology, comparatively speaking, in '93. They got a chicken bone from the wastebasket, for the garbage. And then, years later, they tested for DNA, and they matched it to him based on her, his ex-girlfriend, or whatever you want to call her, turning him in 2002 or 2003. My question is, weren't there 1,000 chicken bones in the garbage? How did they know it was this one?
Well, it's a great question. They'd been cleaning up that night, so everything was empty. The garbage cans were empty, and this was the only thing there. It was a 4-piece chicken meal. There were a few other things in there, like a little coffee stir, some French fries, but this was the only thing there. So that's how they could connect it to the two men. But you're right. It was the confessions compounded with the DNA evidence that really brought it home. And in speaking with, I spoke to one of the jurors on the Luna trial in 2007.
Oh, wow.
She told me that confessions were really the thing that brought it home for people and really connected the dots.
You mean these two guys confessed to the Brown's Chicken murders?
They did, yes. So one, they later kind of recanted on that and said that it was a forced confession, or they didn't mean to. In my view, there's no merit to that. There had been not forced confessions, but there had been false confessions, in this case, 2 kind of 3 And it's a complicated story about why that happened. But I talked to one woman who actually confessed to it, and police they knew it wasn't real. They let her go after, but she had been connected to the restaurant. She'd been scheduled to work that night. She was having dreams, and so after a long interrogation, it just got mixed up in that. But it just goes to show you there were so many twists and turns in this case. And a lot of criticism of the police, too, which I think was unfounded in the end.
That's where I wanted to get hit. Why should the Palatine police at the time not have been criticized, in your opinion?
Well, it's not that they shouldn't have been criticized. You're free to criticize any department in a high-stakes investigation, and I think it's the level and the kind of criticism that they got. I mean, the main thing people say is, oh, they were protective of this investigation, they weren't prepared for it, and the investigators I talked to are people involved with the task force that was formed. Nobody would really argue that. I mean, they brought in all of the help they could have possibly wanted from the FBI and profilers and DNA evidence experts, suburban police, and some of Chicago's most experienced homicide detectives. And the fact of the matter is that it wasn't going to be solved no matter what they did until someone came forward in a way that they did. So I think they did the best they could, and I think that the media attention to this really took the criticism to a level that I think was unfair. And there was a Better Government Association report on this, which got tons of attention at the time, criticizing them. And when you look back at it, it's totally unfounded. It's full of personal attacks. There's no really credibility to it. And so I think that's the beauty of hindsight, is you can kind of look at back and see that now.
Two things I wanted to ask you before we close out our time together, which I've really enjoyed, Patrick. The two convicted murderers, James Degorski, Juan Luna from the Brown's Chicken Massacre, they're serving life sentences. Two things. Why didn't they get death? I know nowadays a lot of the people that run the state of Illinois don't want any death penalty for anybody, no matter what. But they had the death penalty there. Why did these two murderers not get the death penalty? And I see they have life sentences, but is there any chance for them getting out at any time?
No, I don't think there's any chance of them getting out. I mean, there's been so much attention on this. There's been, I would be shocked if something new came out or anything like that. And that's not something people should expect in the book, like a new take on who did it or anything. It's very clearly these two men. Luna has kind of, I think, he's sort of not really appealed. There's kind of stronger evidence against him because they have the DNA. But Degorski has tried a couple different post-conviction appeals, and nothing has stuck. And I think one thing that's important to emphasize too is either one of the reasons sometimes these cases get overturned is, or convictions get overturned is, if people had a bad defense or there was some mistake, they had the best possible defense you could get. And, that's important in the end because it means that it's going to stick because they made their case and so did the prosecution. And
why didn't they get death? Why didn't they get death?
Yeah, I was fascinated by that question because when I spoke to prosecutors and who, ultimately made the decision to go for the death penalty, their view was, we have this punishment in Illinois, at least then. If not for this, then what? And so they made that case. And for the first trial of Luna in 2007, there was one juror who held out. And I talked about the discussion that they had in the book, just about the evidence. And ultimately, she just wouldn't budge on it. Had an opposition to the death penalty, and so. She said no. It was less close in the second trial. There were, I think, 2 or 3 holdouts in the end. So that was their compromise they made. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And no chance for parole at all. And that's kind of that, huh?
Yes, correct.
Right.
No, but barring some extreme changes, I doubt that. No, they're in there.
Patrick Wohl, author, lawyer, and the book is called Something Big. Well done on this book, by the way. Something Big, the true story. You're welcome. Thank you. The true story of the Brown's Chicken Massacre, a decade-long manhunt, and the trials that followed. I think it's going to be a fantastic read. And Patrick, thank you very much for joining us on Chicago's Morning Answer.
Thanks for having me, Chris. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. You too. All right, coming up next, it's Chris and Verdun, of course. A vile cartoon mocking the Trump supporters with the Texas floods. That is coming up next on the Chicago's Morning Answer. Chris in for Dan. Time for news.
This is the
Nikki
morning
Whaley.
show more Chicago radio listeners are choosing. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
I'm worried about Mom. She's having a tough time moving around the house.
Oh, I know. She still thinks she can do everything on her own.
Exactly, but I've been over there every day this week, helping her navigate the stairs, cooking meals, reminding her to take her medicine. I'm always nervous when I leave.
You know what? I admire you for taking care of Mom. But your family needs you too. And what if she slips and falls? A friend recommended the caregivers at Senior Helpers of Naperville Southwest. They service Cook, DuPage, Kane, and Will counties. They guarantee compatibility and they'll conduct a free safety assessment of her home. Plus, they'll provide as little or as much care as Mom needs.
Senior Helpers of Naperville Southwest, offering both hourly and live-in care. Schedule a free assessment today by calling 331-281-0728. That's 331-281-0728. Again, that's 331-281-0728. And tell them AM 560 sent you. Senior Helpers of Naperville Southwest. Senior